We are reading about the experiences of King Asvapati, who will become the human father of Savitri. And Sri Aurobindo is depicting him as a very highly developed individual who has voluntarily descended into our human state as a colonist from immortality to help plant something of the higher realms of consciousness here in our world. And we will be following the journey, the yoga of King Asvapati for another 300 pages. Sri Aurobindo says that the yoga of King Asvapati falls into 3 parts. In the first part, he's doing what we all have to start by doing, that is, developing the individual inner being. At a later stage, he will be able to explore the planes of existence as a representative human being, as a representative of the human race. And thirdly, he will meet the Supreme Divine Mother and ask from her the boon to bring a new power, a transforming power down into the world to make it more divine, to bring about a new creation. But now we are just in the beginning. Sri Aurobindo is describing to us the kinds of spiritual experiences that come about in the process of the soul's release. The soul's release from ignorance is the goal of all yoga, all the different kinds of yoga. And many yogas also have the aim of the soul's release from the wheel of karma and the compulsion to be reborn again and again. So this first goal of yoga is liberation, and the first liberation and transformation undergone by King Asvapati is evoked in this Canto 3. The yoga of the king, the yoga of the soul's release. So last week we were reading about some of the experiences that came to him as through the purification of his consciousness, the doors to the subtle worlds opened up to him, and the kind of experiences he had because of that. And lastly, we read that occasionally, in rare and lucent intervals of hush, he could soar up into a signless region, a world in a realm in which there are no signs, no appearances, no forms, but they are packed with the deep contents of formlessness, where world was into a single being wrapped, and all was known by the light of identity, and spirit was its own self-evidence. In that realm, all the truths unite in a single truth, and all ideas rejoin reality, their origin, their the truth from which they have been emanated. So I'm going to read on from there. And then we'll go back and look sentence by sentence. There, knowing herself by her own termless self, wisdom supernal, wordless, absolute, sat uncompanioned in the eternal calm, all-seeing, motionless, sovereign, and alone. There, knowledge needs not words to embody idea. Idea seeking a house in boundlessness, weary of its homeless immortality, asks not in thought's carved, brilliant cell to rest, whose single window's clipped outlook on things sees only a little arc of God's vast sky. The boundless with the boundless there consorts, while there one can be wider than the world, while there one is one's own infinity. His center was no more in earthly mind. A power of seeing silence filled his limbs. Caught by a voiceless white epiphany into a vision that surpasses forms, into a living that surpasses life, he neared the still consciousness sustaining all. The voice that only by speech can move the mind became a silent knowledge in the soul. The strength that only in action feels its truth was lodged now in a mute, omnipotent peace. A leisure in the labor of the worlds, a pause in the joy and anguish of the search, restored the stress of nature to God's calm. A vast unanimity ended life's debate. The war of thoughts that fathers the universe. The clash of forces struggling to prevail in the tremendous shock that lights a star as in the building of a grain of dust. The grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, ploughed by the seeking of the world's desire. The long regurgitations of time's flood. The torment edging the force of lust that wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime and carves a personality out of mud. The sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed. The estrus which creates with fire of pain. The fate that punishes virtue with defeat. The tragedy that destroys long happiness. The weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, ceased in a truth which lives in its own light. His soul stood free, a witness and a king, absorbed no more in the moment-ridden flux, where mind incessantly drifts as on a raft, hurried from phenomenon to phenomenon. He abode at rest in indivisible time. As if a story long written but acted now, in his present he held his future and his past, felt in the seconds the uncounted years, and saw the hours like dots upon a page. So we can go back to line 360 on page 32. 32, sorry, on page 32. Bhavan, you'll begin.
Then, knowing herself by her own termless self, wisdom supernal, wordless, absolute, sat uncompanioned in the eternal calm, all-seeing, motionless, sovereign, and alone.
In that signless realm where all the truths unite in a single truth and all ideas rejoin reality, the supreme wisdom sits. Knowing herself by her own termless self. There's no limit to her being, to her existence, this supreme wisdom. Nevertheless, Sri Aurobindo personalizes her or speaks of her as a person, a being. And Mother has made a wonderful sketch. I put it on the table for you to see, of wisdom supernal. Wordless, she does not speak. She is absolute. Sat uncompanioned, she is all alone in that eternal calm. All-seeing, motionless, sovereign, and alone. She's a silent ruler of everything. tradition speaks of 4 manifestations of the Supreme as Virat, the Lord of the material world, as Hiranyagarbha, the golden embryo, the dreamer of the subtle worlds, and above them is their origin, Prajna, the supreme wisdom. So she is an embodiment of that state. We might also connect her with Maheshwari, one of the 4 aspects of the Divine Mother. Martin.
There, knowledge needs not words to embody ideal. Ideal seeking a house in boundlessness, weary of its homeless immortality, asks not in tall scarf brilliant self to rest, with single windows crypt outlook on things. It is only a little arc of God's vast sky.
In that realm, in order to give a form to idea, to conception, knowledge doesn't need to put it into words. And that idea, that conception, doesn't ask to find a home in the mind, in thought's carved, brilliant cell. A cell is a little room where a monk lives, perhaps, or where somebody's imprisoned. A small, limited room, and it has only one window, and you can only look out and see a tiny little bit of sky or wall or street or something. No? Through that single window's clipped, restricted outlook, the mind can only see a little arc, just a little bit of God's vast sky. This reminds me of something that Mother has told to the teenagers in the ashram about thoughts and ideas. She said, usually when we think, we tend to think in words. And sometimes, until we have put our idea in words, we don't really know what we're thinking. But she said that's not the true way to think. If we can silence that voice in the mind that's always putting things into words, we can come in contact with ideas, thought forms. And if we can, when we come in contact with those thought forms, remain silent, we'll find that those thought forms give their own words. We don't have to put them into words. They express themselves in words. But she said, beyond that realm of idea, the truest and most powerful and best way of thinking is through experience. So I think here it is the experience of knowledge, the experience of wisdom. No words are needed to embody the idea. And the idea doesn't go running around looking for a home in somebody's mind, in somebody's thought. No. idea can exist in homeless immortality, can be immortal. It doesn't need to find a fixed home. It can flow wherever there's some opening for it. But what usually happens is that ideas get forced to live in this carved, brilliant cell. The idea can be very brilliant and shining and impressive, but it's got only such a narrow outlook on the vastness of truth, on the vastness of God's sky.
Shraddhavan, it is very interesting what you said. I listened recently what Mother said about thoughts, about words. But Mother explained when he tells words with consciousness, some experience, but very, very deeply. And when he emanates from her, he don't tell about her, but he touched some part of yourself. And when he touched some part of yourself, words of the Mother, depends what he taught, is automatically you have some connection with, for example, wisdom or love. Automatically, it wasn't not recently, but many times. When I listen Mother, some words, the Mother touched me immediately. And he touched the part of me when his receptive cells also. It's very, very, very interesting.
This is because, and we can hear it in the Mother's readings of Savitri. None of us can read Savitri the way that the Mother reads Savitri. She reads the lines of Savitri with all her vast consciousness. So they reverberate like that. And as you say, her voice, very, very, especially in the earlier days, in the last 4 or 5 years, it is more difficult for us to listen to her voice. But nevertheless, all that consciousness is still there and so powerful. If we are sensitive, we can feel it, as you say, Ganga Lakshmi, touching different parts of our being. Yes, thank you. Who is next? Subha.
The boundless with the boundless their counsel. Wider, one can be wider than the world. Wider, one is one's own infinity.
So there is in that world, in that signless realm, where all the ideas rejoin reality and all the truths unite in a single truth. So Asvapati is able to soar up into that realm. And Sri Aurobindo says that while one is there, while one's consciousness is there, one can be wider than the world, participate in the vastness. While there, one is one's own infinity. One can experience one's own original, limitless state. There, the boundless with the boundless consorts. There's a kind of meeting of boundlessnesses, a communication between boundlessnesses. Mochi, you read?
Boundless is, there is no boundary.
There's no boundary.
Then how boundless and boundless?
But maybe you can imagine that one infinity can have a certain flavor or color, and that two different infinities with different flavors or different colors can communicate and mingle and yeah.
Consort is
To consort means to to have an exchange of some kind.
So it's a verb here.
It's a verb, yes. Yes, Mohan.
His center was no more in earthly mind. A power of sin, silence filled his limbs. Caught by a voiceless quiet epiphany into a vision that surpasses forms, into a living that surpasses life. He neared the still consciousness
Sustaining.
all.
Yes, thank you. So, Asvapati, his center is no more in earthly mind. The center of his consciousness has moved much higher. And as a result, there's a power of seeing silence filled his limbs. He feels his whole body being filled with this silence, which is a power of vision. It sees and knows. And then it's as if something catches hold of him, caught by a voiceless white epiphany. The word epiphany comes from Greek, and it means a revelation of divinity. It's something like our Sanskrit word darshan. So it's as if some divine being or some power of divinity that is voiceless, silent, white, absolutely pure and yet integral, seizes hold of him and carries him into another state, a state of vision, a seeing that surpasses forms. It's difficult for us. Our vision depends so much on forms and shapes and colors. We can't imagine a vision that goes beyond all that. But he's carried up into this power of vision that goes beyond form and into a kind of living that goes beyond what we know as life. Because of this movement of his center of consciousness and his being carried up into this new state, he becomes near to the still consciousness sustaining all. None of this in the material world and as well as in the subtle worlds could exist unless it were sustained and supported and held by one silent, unmoving consciousness. So he becomes very near to that one consciousness. Mohan.
The voice that only by speech can move the mind becomes silent knowledge in the soul. The strength that only in action feels its truth was lost, now in a mute, omnipotent peace.
Yes. So the voice of the mind, our physical voice, can only move the mind through speech, by talking to it, no? But that voice of consciousness, it's no longer like that. It becomes a power of silent knowledge in the soul. It doesn't need words anymore. And the strength, the life force, the consciousness force that for us only feels its truth in action, which can express itself in action, now becomes lodged at rest in a state of all-powerful peace. No action is needed for it to achieve whatever it wills. Lela, you would read?
Leisure in the labor of words, pause in the joy and anguish of the soul, restores the stress of nature to God's calm.
Read the next line, please.
A vast unanimity and a wise debate.
Yes. So this is the experience that King Asvapati has. Sri Aurobindo, often in the poem, he speaks about the labor of the worlds. It's one characteristic of this universe that we inhabit, is that there is movement and effort and change going on. But it's as if all that slows down. It even stops. There's a pause in the joy and anguish of the search. Everything in this universe is searching for fulfillment, and that gives both satisfaction and pain. But all that stops. This nature, all the stress and effort of nature is restored to God's calm, the perfect, omnipotent rest of the Supreme. A vast unanimity ended life's debate. It's as if all the life, all the movement in the universe is made up of questions and answers, and arguments and counter-arguments. All these different possibilities and realities and different kinds of truths conflicting, trying to impose themselves. Suddenly, all that comes into agreement. Unanimity is when everybody says, yes, that's how it is. One soul, if we take the literal meaning of the word, it means of one soul. Anima is the soul, unanimity, one soul. Everybody's in perfect agreement. A vast unanimity ended life's debate. All those questions and answers and statements and counter-statements and impulses and contrary impulses. It all pauses. And then he gives a long list of examples of some of those things that pause. Let's follow them. Joel.
The war of thoughts that fathers the universe, the clash of forces struggling to prevail in the tremendous shock that lights a star, as in the building of a grain of dust, the grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, though by the seeking of the world's desire, the long regurgitations of time's flood, the torment edging the dire force of lust, that wakes kinetic in earth's duller slime, and carves a personality out of mud, the sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed, the oestrus which creates with fire of pain, the fate that punishes virtue with defeat, the tragedy that destroys long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, sees in truth which lives in its own light.
Thank you. First of all, the war of thoughts that fathers the universe. These are, of course, not human thoughts, but it's as if some universal mind has given rise to different thoughts, and it's the friction between these different thoughts that has given rise to this universe that we live in. There was a mystic Greek philosopher called Heraclitus. Sri Aurobindo has written a book about him, a small book. We know him, his thought and his aphorisms, his thought only through a few aphorisms that have been quoted by later writers. But one of the things that he's supposed to have said is that war is the father of all things. So Sri Aurobindo is in a way quoting that here. This war of thoughts that fathers the universe. And then the clash of forces. It's a similar idea. There's a friction between different kinds of energies. And each one is struggling to prevail, to be stronger than all the others. And those forces are struggling to prevail. He says, in the tremendous shock that lights a star, as in the building of a grain of dust. Actually, the forces that are operating at the atomic level are supposed to be even stronger than the force of gravity, which brings about this explosion of stars through a tremendous shock, all this friction that lights up a star. That's all due to a clash of forces on whatever scale, on whatever level. And then he speaks of the grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space. And grooves, of course, to my generation, it brings the idea of a gramophone record. The old, before we had CDs, that there were grooves in the plastic of the record, and we would put in a needle and start the engine, and it would play the music. I suppose the CDs we have nowadays work in a similar way. But these are permanent tracks. If we put the needle in, it has to stay in this track and follow these grooves. All of us get into grooves in our lives, grooves of habit, of habitual reactions. No? He says there are grooves that are turning their dumb ellipse in space, as if there are grooves in space-time which form the orbits of the heavenly bodies. But he says those grooves are ploughed. The farmer with his plough also makes a groove in the soil. No? These grooves out there in space, which are keeping all the the planets and galaxies whirling. He says they are ploughed by the seeking of the world's desire. There's a desire in the material world to be, to exist, to continue, and that is what has created these grooves. And then he speaks about the long regurgitations of time's flood. Regurgitation is when something is swallowed and then vomited out again. So it's as if time swallows things up and then after some time spits them out again. They reappear. It takes a long time between the absorption and the regurgitation in this ocean of time. And then there's the pain, the torment, the intense suffering, edging the dire force of lust, of intense desire and craving. It's so painful. He says that pain wakes up in a dynamic way, in an active way. Kinetic means active, no? It wakes up in earth's dullard slime. Earth is the material principle. So it's dullard, it's unconscious, it's insensitive, it's unresponsive. It expresses itself perhaps in slime or mud. But because of this pressure of craving, of desire, this torment, that mud becomes alive. Evolution starts or continues. It's that force, that drive, which carves a personality out of mud, out of the mud that makes up our bodies. The sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed.
What is meat fed?
Sorry? Fed. Nourri. Nourished, nourri. We feed our hunger, no? We go on feeding our hunger. The estrus, the creative urge, the creative instinct, which creates, even with fire of pain, intensity of pain. And this characteristic we find in our world, the fate, the fixed destiny, which seems for no apparent reason to punish virtue, good behavior, allows it to be defeated, forces it perhaps to be defeated. The tragedy that destroys long happiness. The weeping of love. The quarrel of the gods. The gods are the cosmic powers, no? And we see them quarreling. Each of them is struggling to prevail. All these things ceased. They just stop in that truth which lives in its own light of consciousness. All these forces and struggles. This is an experience which Asvapati has. When he enters that realm in which all the truths unite in a single truth and all ideas rejoin reality. Joel, did you read? Yes. Would you like to read? Anshal, you will read.
His soul stood free, a witness and a king, absorbed no more in the moment-ridden flux. Their mind incessantly drifts as on a raft, hurried from phenomenon to phenomenon. He abode at rest in indivisible time.
Yes, so this is an experience of liberation. His soul stood free. It's able to witness all this happening. It's able to be master of itself and its environment. His soul stood free, a witness and a king. And now he's no longer absorbed, concentrated in this flow of on which the moments ride, the flow of time. No? And that flow, mind is carried along as if in a river, drifting on a raft. A raft keeps you on the surface, but you can't steer it. You can't decide where it will go. It's just carried along by the flow. So our minds are like that. We're carried from one phenomenon, from one appearance, one happening, to the next, to the next, to the next, without any control. No? Incessantly, endlessly, our mind is carried along on the flow of time like that. We get hurried. We can't stop it. Even if we would like to, we can't stop it. We get carried along quickly from one thing to the next. But that has changed for Aspapati. He abode at rest in indivisible time. He is no longer being carried along from moment to moment. He sees this indivisible time. I think last week or the week before, we said he owned the house of undivided time. It's on page 28. The house, the building of which contains past and present and future. He feels at home there. He owns that. And now he's in a state where it's not just undivided, it's indivisible. It can't be divided. Everything is simultaneous. And that's developed in the next sentence, Dhanalakshmi.
As if a story long written but acted now. In his present, he held his future and his past. Felt in the seconds the uncounted years and saw the others like dots upon a page.
Yes. So these words are not difficult, no? He's experiencing his whole past, not just in this lifetime, his whole past. In his present, he held his future and his past. In the seconds of time, he can feel all the uncounted years which they are a part of. And he can see the hours, just like one dot after another. On a page, there are so many dots. We'll stop there for today. There, knowing herself by her own termless self, wisdom supernal, wordless, absolute, sat uncompanioned in the eternal calm, all-seeing, motionless, sovereign and alone. There knowledge needs not words to embody idea. Idea seeking a house in boundlessness, weary of its homeless immortality, asks not in thought's carved brilliant cell to rest, whose single windows clipped outlook on things sees only a little arc of God's vast sky. The boundless with the boundless there consorts, while there one can be wider than the world, while there one is one's own infinity. His centre was no more in earthly mind. A power of seeing silence filled his limbs. Caught by a voiceless white epiphany, into a vision that surpasses forms, into a living that surpasses life, he neared the still consciousness sustaining all. The voice that only by speech can move the mind became a silent knowledge in the soul. The strength that only in action feels its truth was lodged now in a mute, omnipotent peace. A leisure in the labour of the worlds, a pause in the joy and anguish of the search, restored the stress of nature to God's calm. A vast unanimity ended life's debate. The war of thoughts that fathers the universe, the clash of forces struggling to prevail in the tremendous shock that lights a star as in the building of a grain of dust, the grooves that turn their dumb ellipse in space, ploughed by the seeking of the world's desire, the long regurgitations of time's flood, the torment edging the dire force of lust that wakes kinetic in earth's dullard slime and carves a personality out of mud. The sorrow by which nature's hunger is fed, the estrus which creates with fire of pain, the fate that punishes virtue with defeat, the tragedy that destroys long happiness, the weeping of love, the quarrel of the gods, ceased in a truth which lives in its own light. His soul stood free, a witness and a king, absorbed no more in the moment-ridden flux, where mind incessantly drifts as on a raft, hurried from phenomenon to phenomenon. He abode at rest in indivisible time. As if a story long written but acted now, in his present he held his future and his past, felt in the seconds the uncounted years, and saw the hours like dots upon a page.